What's up, everybody? It's been a few days. We're back in the garage. We're going to continue with this little 283 build. This is the not so exciting part of building engines and all that is cleaning, the prep work. It's boring. It sucks. We'll probably just cut right through it on the video, but this is what makes or breaks your engine build. If it's not clean, then you're doomed to failure before you even get started. So take the time to clean everything. Blow it out 50 times if you have to. It also matters, like get some good carburetor cleaner. I don't like using brake clean because it leaves that white film behind. I use carburetor cleaner. Another little trick I like to use is the best kind of shop rag is an old t-shirt. Cotton, 100% cotton t-shirts. It's the best shop rag. Don't use a terry cloth. Don't use a blue shop rag or red, orange shop rag. They leave a lot of lint behind. When you're wiping off cast iron, it leaves a lot of fibers behind. So your best bet, 100% cotton, old t-shirts. They work great. Best shop rag you can use when you're assembling an engine. What else? Clean, 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 and clean some more. Clean it again. Blow it out again. Oil passages, galleys, anything like that, any nooks and crannies where metal shavings could be from the machining processes, anything like that. It's going to get in the oil, and the oil is going to push it right through the engine, and contaminated oil is going to get in the bearings. You've got, we're talking thousandths of an inch clearance, so it doesn't take much to get anything in there, and it's going to scar the bearings, which is going to cause more metal shavings, and then more metal shavings in the oil is going to cause more metal shavings, and the engine will self-destruct rapidly. So clean, 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 and clean some more. Before I start slamming bearings and crank and cam, and before I start any major assembly work, I do a lot of block cleaning, prep, freeze plugs before anything else. So I like to use brass. Do yourself a favor, always use brass. Steel freeze plugs, they don't last as long, they rust, and then they start leaking. 9 times out of 10, it'll be the ones in the back, and the only way to get to them is to drop the transmission or pull the engine back out later, and that sucks. Nobody wants to do that. So spend the extra couple bucks, get yourself some brass freeze plugs. The way I put these in is with my calibrated socket that I like to beat on, real expensive tools. Anyways, the trick I like to use is I use a little bit of elephant snot or gasket, former gasket, the real sticky, gooey stuff that if you touch it, it gets all over everything. So I put a tiny bit around the outer edge. That's probably too much. It's going to make a mess. When you go to put it in, wipe off the excess. But put a little bit of this around the edge. There you go. Stick it on here like this. Ta-da! Just like that. Wipe off the excess. Good to go. Do that about 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 more times, and we're good. Alright, so it should look like that when you're done. Nice and flush. All the excess wiped up. I went ahead and put these into, those screw into water jackets, and they are pipe thread, so I put a little bit of Teflon tape on those. Um, I do like to leave the oil galley plugs out for now, just because I want to clean it a few times. So I don't put those plugs in yet. Now, if this was a performance engine with a high volume pump that revved real high, I would actually take a pipe tap and I would tap these three and put plugs in them, threaded NPT plugs in them. But with this engine, it's not gonna need that, so I'm not gonna do it. But yeah, you can. One other thing, sometimes if this was a performance type build, you might want to put a petcock valve right there. So if you have to pull the engine, you can drain the coolant. You would just open the petcock valve and drain the coolant from both sides of the block, so you don't make such a mess. But on this engine, it's not necessary. Okay, the next thing that I like to do as far as block preparation or block cleaning is I like to run a tap through all the threads, anything that's going to get torqued, anything especially that goes into water jacket like a head bolt does. I want to clean those threads up because there might be some rust on them, there might be some debris in that hole, we don't know. So I'm going to blow it out, I'm going to chase the threads, hit it with some WD-40, clean the bolt holes, and if you're going to reuse the head bolts, chase those threads with a die, because like I said, anything that causes any kind of friction or any kind of resistance, as you're torquing that bolt, is going to change the torque spec. So it might click, but is it actually torqued to that number? No, it's not. So that's going to cause an uneven head bolt, which is going to cause possible head gasket problems, which is going to cause possible warping of the head, cracking of the head, anything like that. Any kind of problems like that. To help avoid them, clean all your threads. A little bit of WD-40, boom, on the thread. Stick it in the first one here. Do not cross thread it. Get it started even. Chase it all the way down. Chase it all the way back. You know, if it's running nice and smooth like that, it's probably pretty good. Take it out. And then that's it. Now do that on all of them. All right, here it is. We're gonna attempt to start putting bearings in the crankshaft in. So here's what we need to do. We're going to remove all these main caps and clean them, and we're gonna clean underneath them, and we're gonna clean the oil passages, those little holes right there. We're gonna make sure there's nothing in there. But now, before an engine ever goes to the machine shop, I always disassemble it and inspect everything. So what you'll do is especially if it's the first time the engine's ever been apart, you're gonna need to number these 1, 2, 3, 4 in order. You're gonna stamp the number right there. And the reason for that is these cannot be switched around. They cannot be flip-flopped. They cannot be moved. 1 has to stay in 1, 2 has to stay in 2, 3 has to stay there. You cannot move these around. They're not interchangeable. During the machining process, originally from the factory, these are set up. The caps are ground, and then they're bolted on the block, and then they punch the hole through it. So that cap has to stay right where it's at. It also has to stay in the right direction. There's always an arrow. If you see it right there, there's always an arrow. And the arrow points to, that one's kind of ugly. That one looks all right. But the arrow always points towards the front of the engine. Unlike a connecting rod, which will have an odd and an even. We'll get into that later, but those will go, odds and evens will point different directions. But these main caps will have an arrow on them. They'll point to the front, and they need to be numbered. Before you send it to the machine shop, I like to stamp the numbers on them. Once the caps are out of the way and I'm ready to start cleaning, I set them up here on the bench. I always keep them in order, even though they're stamped, just because I have OCD. But they're going to go back on in the exact same order they came off. Now, what I'm talking about cleaning is I need to clean everything inside here, but especially pay attention to the surface here where your bearing's going to sit, these surfaces, also these flat surfaces. This is where the cap's going to sit, so both surfaces of the cap and the block need to be really clean right here. If there's anything on here, dirt, dust, debris of any kind, it's going to cause the cap to sit up kind of crooked, which will mean that the bearing will not be perfectly round anymore, and you're asking for bearing failure and low oil pressure and all kinds of other issues like that. So this surface, especially where the bearing's going to sit, blow out these holes, the bolt holes, make sure there's nothing in there that's going to cause us to have a inaccurate torque. And these flat surfaces here. Alright, I think I'm ready to start sliding bearings in. These would be the upper bearings. Remember, the engine is upside down, so we will call these the uppers. So if you look on the box, these are some clevites. They should say 10 on them. The crank was turned 1010, but let's check the part number. That's what that 10 on the back of that number means. Or you can also look on the bearing itself. Let's see if I can see it. Hold on. See that 010 right there? Upper. The difference between the uppers and the lowers is the uppers have the oiling holes that are going to line up here. So it'll have holes in it. It'll say upper on it, and look for the 010 so you know that it's going to match your crankshaft. Alright, I slid these first two in. This big one in the back, that's called your thrust bearing. It's got these side flanges on here that keeps the crankshaft from walking back and forth. That's your thrust bearing. The rest of these are all the same. They're all going to be the same. Now, like we said earlier, clean, clean, clean. The surface of the block needs to be absolutely clean and dry. No oil, no grease, no dirt, no lint, nothing. Clean. Block should be clean, and the back side of the bearing should be clean. And the way I do it is I set it tang side in first. I'm trying to do this one-handed. Set the tang side in first. Flush to the lip. Now, I don't spin the bearing in. The reason why is this edge is kind of sharp, and I don't want to drag the bearing across the back of that. It'll put a nice gouge in the bearing. It'll kind of remove some of the babbitt off the bearing surface here on the backside. It could distort the bearing. I don't want to do that. So what I'm real careful at doing is I'll start it on this side, and then I'll kind of pull towards me and then push it down. Don't roll it in. Don't gouge the back side of the bearing. Well, so far so good. We got all the bearings in. I've put all the caps back on in order, of course. I've torqued them to spec. In this case, it's 65 foot-pounds. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a measurement of all my main journals. I'm going to double check them all. They should all be the same. And I'm going to double check all my bearings. And I'm going to subtract the two together, and that'll tell me what my bearing clearance is. Or you could use plastic gauge. Some guys like to use plastic gauge. But in this case, I'm going to take measurements. One more thing I want to point out. On my crankshaft, I had the machine shop drill and tap and thread this hole here for me. Now, in the 60s, early 60s to mid 60s, 283s, 327s, small block Chevys, that small journal engines didn't have that harmonic balancer bolt. So that's kind of cool. It makes it easier for pressing on the cam gear and harmonic balancer with my press tool. And you can put a harmonic balancer bolt in it when you're done. Whereas originally this engine and other early small journal engines did not have a harmonic balancer bolt. So if you ever send one to the machine shop, ask them to do that for you. For a couple bucks, it's well worth it. Well, according to my calculations, all my main journals came out to 1.5 to just under 2 thousandths clearance. So that's pretty good for a street engine, stock street engine. So next step is we remove the caps. Now we are going to install the rear main seal. Now the rear main seal, you want that big lip to face towards the front of the engine, and you want to offset it slightly. So we're going to put this in with a little bit of silicone on it on the back side, and we're going to offset it. So it's going to be, that's a little bit much, but you get the idea. You don't make it flush. You want one side higher and one side lower, and you're going to make that the main cap opposite. So you don't want the ends to line up. So it helps with rear main seal leaks. Alright, now we got something that looks like this. I put a little bit of assembly lube on the bearing only. Don't put anything on the block. That needs to stay perfectly dry. Clean and dry on the flat parts here. Only assembly lube on the bearings, and I put a little bit of light oil on the rear main seal. That thing is hard rubber, so when this thing fires up for the first time, you don't want the crankshaft, a lot of friction on that thing. It'll ruin your rear main seal. So put a little bit of oil on that seal too. So a thick assembly lube, regular cheap old assembly lube on the bearings. Rear main seals in with a little bit of silicone on the back side, a little bit of oil on the front side, and it's offset. Now we can go ahead and set the crankshaft in. We've cleaned it, we blew it out, especially the oil passages, all the holes for the oil passages. Spray it out with carburetor cleaner, hit it with your air hose a couple of times. Make sure it's real clean. Go ahead and carefully set it in here, straight as possible. Don't ding any of the bearings as you do this. Set it on down, just like that. Careful. Done. Now, main caps. Same thing. Rear main seal is offset to one side. A little bit of silicone on the back side. I put a little bit of assembly lube on here. Not much. And a little bit of oil, just a couple drops on the rear main seal, and smear that around a little bit. Go ahead and set it on there. Go ahead and do all of them. All right, here we go. So once the caps are set down on there, I don't turn the crankshaft at all yet. I want to put a little bit of lube on those bolts. I've got a bunch of these packets that ARP sends out with all their ARP kits. I've got a bunch of these laying around, so I'm going to put some on the threads just because less friction on the threads, what we talked about before, it's going to give you a better, more accurate torque. So I'm going to put some of this on the threads, and then I'm going to run all the bolts down by hand. I'm not going to torque them just yet till I get them all down and all even. Scout came out to visit. Huh, Scout? Yeah, you helping? Yeah, you're a big help. Okay, so I still haven't rotated the crankshaft, but all of the bolts are down kind of hand tight. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start torquing this, and it's 65 foot-pounds, and it goes in a rotating pattern, starting with the center one. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, not in a circle, just like that. And then I'll try test spinning the crankshaft. So I'll take my torque wrench and I'll set it at like I like to do it in steps, so I will put it at like 40, something not too high, not too low. Put it at 40. Go ahead and start. I do the double click. I know it's real exciting, but this is the stuff I think about when I'm driving the car. After I put it all together and I get in the car and I hit the key and I'm driving down the road, I picture this, assembling this and something I put together with my own hands. It's that's the rewarding part. I'll go ahead and put it up to 65. Here we go. That's it. Now the moment of truth. How does it spin? I'm feeling how smooth it is. I'm feeling for any tight spots. It should be the same all the way around. If you feel a tight spot in it, stop. Take it back apart. Check your bearings. Something's wrong. A clearance is wrong. Or, I don't know, God forbid there's something in there, a piece of metal, I don't know. But this feels really good. Real smooth all the way around. No tight spots. So far so good. The next thing I want to check is I'm confident that the crankshaft is spinning nice and free, no tight spots. So I put a dial indicator on the snout of the crankshaft and I zeroed it. I pushed the crank all the way back, and the way you do that is you take a big screwdriver, stick it in between something here, pry the crank back and forth. What we're going to look for now is how much does the crankshaft move front to back. So if I pry on this, and I should see that gauge move. Yep. Just under 5, back and forth here a little bit. Just under 5, which is okay. Bring it back, bring it forward. It's 4.5 maybe, which I'm okay with that. All right, I would call that an installed crankshaft. So there you go. We cleaned everything. We cleaned it again. We checked it. We cleaned it some more, and then went ahead and put the bearings in. Checked our clearances, what they were going to be. Went ahead and put a little bit of assembly lube on it, not too much. Dropped it in with the rear main seal, a little bit of silicone on the back of it, offset a little bit. That's what you want. You know what I didn't film was I put a little bit of silicone in the corners of the rear main cap as well. next to the rear main seal. Put a little dab, not a lot. You don't want it squishing out everywhere, getting on the crankshaft or getting on that rear main seal. I also like to put a little bit of oil on that rear main seal because I don't want it to fire up dry. Speaking of firing up dry, I don't get too crazy with the assembly lubes and stuff and all the additives and whatnot. I buy good break-in oil, and I have a distributor that I took the guts out of and the gear off the bottom, and I welded a tip on the end, and I use an electric drill, and I prime the engine. I prime it until I've got oil coming out of every rocker arm at the top. So before I ever try to crank the engine or fire it, I know that I'm gonna pre-lube everything and prime the whole engine. So once I do that, I know that I've got oil everywhere it needs to be. I do that before I fire it, and we're gonna do that on a test stand. I have an engine test stand, so we're gonna run this thing. We're gonna prime it, and we're gonna run it and tune it before it ever goes in the car. We're gonna get there. It's just bear with me. We're gonna do it one step at a time, going from a bare block all the way to driving it to a car show. You're gonna see it here on Tackett's House of Horsepower, because that's what we like to do. Peace out. Take it easy.